The first thing people noticed was the smoke-thick black rolling upward like a warning no one wanted to read. Traffic had come to a sudden panicked stop. Car doors opened. Someone screamed. Another voice shouted for help. In the middle of the intersection, a sedan sat mangled against a light pole, its hood crumpled, flames licking out from beneath the engine. Heat rippled the air. You could hear it crackling, popping, alive. Most people froze where they were, phones half raised, hearts pounding, minds racing through the same terrifying thought. That car is about to explode. She was on her way home from school, backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds still in. A black girl with college brochures folded neatly inside her bag. A future mapped out by deadlines, grades, and one fragile thing holding it all together, a full scholarship she could not afford to lose. She stopped when she saw the fire. She stopped when she heard the sound that mattered most. A boy screaming from inside the car. He was trapped. The driver's door wouldn't open. Flames were spreading fast, crawling closer to the cabin. People shouted at her to stay back. Someone yelled that emergency services were already on the way. Someone else screamed, "It's too dangerous." She knew that. Everyone did. She could feel the heat from where she stood. She could smell burning rubber and fuel. She knew one spark, 1 second too late, and the car could turn into a fireball. For a fraction of a second, she hesitated, and then she ran. Her shoes slipped on broken glass. Smoke burned her lungs the moment she got close. She didn't think about her grades, her future, or the scholarship committee waiting on paperwork. She didn't think about how fire spreads or how often these rescues end badly. All she saw was a terrified boy, pounding weakly on the window, eyes wide with panic. She yanked at the door once. It wouldn't budge. Twice. Nothing. The flames flared louder, angrier. She screamed at him to cover his face, wrapped her jacket around her hands, and pulled again with everything she had. This time, the door gave way. She dragged him out, coughing, both of them stumbling back just as the flames surged higher. They hit the pavement hard. Seconds later, the car erupted. The sound was deafening. People screamed again, this time in shock. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. Someone pulled the boy away. Someone else grabbed her before she collapsed. The smoke had done its damage. Her vision blurred. Her chest burned. As paramedics rushed in, she slipped in and out of consciousness, unaware that the moment everyone would later call heroic was already costing her more than she could imagine. Weeks later, her body had mostly healed. The burns faded. The coughing stopped. Life, she hoped, was finally getting back on track. One afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, heart steady, ready to check her email. Then she saw the subject line. Her full college scholarship revoked. No explanation that felt human. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just rules, deadlines, consequences. And as the screen blurred with tears, one question echoed louder than the explosion ever had. How does someone lose everything for doing the right thing? She wasn't supposed to be extraordinary. At least, that's what the world around her quietly suggested. She was just a black girl from a neighborhood where expectations were low and chances were fragile, where success wasn't assumed but earned through exhaustion. Yet anyone who actually knew her understood the truth. She was brilliant. Not loud about it, not flashy, just relentlessly focused. A first-generation college hopeful who carried the weight of her family's dreams without ever complaining. For her, college wasn't about prestige or adventure. It was about escape. About breaking a cycle that had wrapped itself tightly around generations before her. That scholarship was everything. It wasn't a bonus. It wasn't a reward. It was the only door open. Without it, college simply wouldn't happen. There was no backup fund, no hidden savings, no safety net waiting quietly beneath her. Every late night bent over textbooks, every weekend spent studying instead of resting. Every sacrifice she made as a teenager had been made with one goal in mind, to earn and keep that scholarship. It was her future in writing, fragile and conditional, but real. Most nights, her room light stayed on long after the rest of the house went dark. She studied while others slept. She reread notes until words blurred together. Pressure wasn't something she felt occasionally. It lived with her. The pressure to succeed, to justify the faith teachers placed in her, to prove that all the sacrifices were worth it. She dreamed carefully, responsibly, because dreaming too big felt dangerous when so much depended on staying within the rules. And then there was the boy. She didn't know his name that day. She didn't know where he went to school or where he lived. She didn't know that he came from a world completely different from hers. A private school student, raised with resources, with opportunities that didn't hinge on a single email or a single decision. She didn't know his father was powerful, influential, or connected in ways she couldn't imagine. In that moment, none of that existed to her. He wasn't privilege or status. He was just a terrified kid trapped in a burning car. She never thought of herself as a hero. Even afterward, lying in recovery, she didn't frame it that way. She did what felt unavoidable, what felt human. But the world has a way of rewriting stories once the smoke clears. When the excitement faded, when the headlines never came, when the rules reasserted themselves, she was left holding the cost alone. That's where the conflict truly begins. Not in the fire, but in the silence afterward. In a system that praised bravery in theory, but punished it in practice. In the quiet realization that doing the right thing doesn't always come with protection. That sometimes, the people who sacrifice the most are asked to pay in ways no one sees. So the question lingers, uncomfortable and unresolved, hanging over everything that follows. Who decides what sacrifice is worth? Who gets rewarded and who gets forgotten? And what happens when the rules matter more than the life someone saved? The day of the fire began like so many others, ordinary and predictable. The kind of day that never warns you it's about to change everything. School let out in the late afternoon. Lockers slammed shut. Voices filled the halls, and she stepped outside with her backpack heavy against her shoulders. The air was warm, the sky stretched wide and clear, and her mind was already shifting to what came next: homework, scholarship deadlines, another night of studying. She followed the same route she always did, walking toward the bus stop with her head slightly down, replaying formulas and essay outlines in her thoughts. It was routine, safe, controlled, exactly the kind of life she had learned to maintain. Traffic that afternoon was unusually dense. Horns blared in short, irritated bursts. Cars inched forward, then stopped again, drivers frustrated by the slow crawl through the intersection near the school. She stood at the curb, waiting for the signal to change, watching vehicles stack up in every direction. Nothing about the moment felt dangerous, just loud, impatient, messy in the way cities often are when everyone is trying to get somewhere else. Then it happened. The sound came first. A sharp, violent screech of tires followed by a crash so loud it silenced everything else. Metal slammed into metal. Glass exploded outward. A car clipped another vehicle, spun out of control, and slammed hard into a light pole. For a split second, the world seemed to pause, as if everyone needed time to understand what they were seeing. Then smoke began to rise from the wreckage, dark and thick, curling into the air. People screamed. Someone shouted to call 911. A driver slammed their door shut and backed away. Another froze in place, staring. Flames flickered beneath the hood of the car, small at first, then stronger, spreading with frightening speed. The heat was visible, warping the air around it. Fear moved through the crowd like electricity fast, contagious, paralyzing. She felt it too. Her heart raced as her body reacted before her mind fully caught up. Every instinct told her to stay back. Fires were unpredictable. Cars could explode. She had heard the warnings all her life. Don't get too close. Don't be a hero. Wait for professionals. She took a step backward, clutching the strap of her backpack, eyes fixed on the burning vehicle. Then she heard it. A scream, raw and desperate, cutting through the chaos. It came from inside the car. She saw him through the smoke, a boy in the driver's seat, coughing violently, slamming his hands against the door. The flames were closer now, licking upward, creeping toward the windows. His movements grew frantic, then weak. Panic twisted in her chest. She knew what everyone else knew. That car was moments away from becoming something far worse. Her mind split in two. One side screamed logic. You can't help. You're not trained. You'll get hurt. You'll ruin everything you've worked for. The other side didn't speak in words at all. It moved her feet forward before fear could stop them. She ran. People yelled at her to stop. Someone grabbed for her arm and missed. Heat slammed into her the closer she got, smoke burning her throat and eyes. She gagged but kept going, tears streaming down her face from the sting. She reached the driver's side door and pulled. It wouldn't open. Panic surged again, stronger this time, threatening to overwhelm her. The flames flared. She yanked harder, using her jacket to protect her hands. Pain shot through her palms as the metal burned through the fabric. She pulled again, screaming without realizing it, muscles straining past what felt possible. The door finally jerked open with a violent snap. Smoke poured out, thick and suffocating. She leaned in, wrapped her arms around the boy, and dragged him toward her. He was heavier than she expected, limp and coughing, barely able to help. Her lungs burned with every breath. Her vision blurred. The heat felt unbearable now, roaring behind them like something alive. They stumbled away from the car together, collapsing onto the pavement just as a deep, explosive sound ripped through the air. Flames surged upward, consuming the vehicle completely. The crowd screamed again, louder this time, terror mixing with disbelief. She lay there, chest heaving, hands shaking uncontrollably. Pain radiated through her arms and shoulders. Her skin felt raw, stinging where the heat had kissed it too long. The boy was pulled away by strangers, hands gripping his shoulders, voices asking if he could breathe. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The world spun as adrenaline drained from her body. Smoke inhalation made every breath feel shallow and sharp. Her ears rang. Faces blurred together above her, concerned, shocked, frantic. Someone pressed something cool against her hand. Another voice told her to stay awake. She tried. As paramedics arrived, lifting her onto a stretcher, the weight of what had just happened began to crash down on her all at once. Not pride, not relief, just exhaustion. A deep, bone-heavy exhaustion that pulled her toward darkness. She didn't see the boy again. She didn't hear anyone call her a hero. By the time the ambulance doors closed and the sirens took over, she was barely conscious, unaware that the moment she chose instinct over fear would follow her long after the burns healed, and that the real consequences of that day were only just beginning. The recovery was nothing like she imagined. In the days after the fire, pain replaced adrenaline with a cruel steadiness. Hospital rooms blurred together, white walls, buzzing lights, the constant beep of machines tracking breaths she struggled to take without coughing. Smoke inhalation left her chest tight and aching, every breath shallow and uncomfortable. Burns on her hands and arms throbbed beneath layers of gauze, a constant reminder of how close she had been to something far worse. Nurses moved in and out, kind but busy, adjusting IVs, reminding her to rest, asking her to rate pain on a scale that felt meaningless when the hurt was everywhere. School became a distant thought. Her backpack sat untouched at home, notebooks frozen in time on the last page she'd written. Days turned into a week, then two. She drifted in and out of sleep, waking to soreness, to the sound of carts rolling down hallways, to the realization that life outside the hospital was continuing without her. Teachers sent brief messages wishing her well. Friends checked in at first, then less often. The world didn't stop burning, just because she had pulled someone out of a fire. When she was finally discharged, recovery followed her home. She moved slowly, coughing when she tried to do too much, hands still wrapped and sensitive. Studying hurt. Writing hurt. Even holding a pen felt foreign, but panic pushed her forward. She tried to catch up, flipping through missed lessons, scanning emails she had ignored while hospitalized. That's when she saw it, the dates. Exams had passed. Important ones. Finals. Assessments tied directly to her scholarship requirements. And buried among those messages was another reminder she had completely missed. Documentation deadlines. Forms that required signatures. Proof of attendance. Compliance confirmations. Cold. Administrative steps that didn't care why you were late, only that you were. Her chest tightened, and this time it had nothing to do with smoke. She emailed immediately, explained she had been hospitalized. Attached discharge papers. Asked for guidance. She waited, refreshed her inbox. Checked again. Hours passed. Then a day. Then another. Silence stretched, heavy and unnerving. She called the number listed for the scholarship office. It rang. Voicemail. She left a message, voice shaking but polite, careful not to sound desperate even though she was. The reply came a few days later. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a real explanation. It was an email short, formal, impersonal. It informed her that due to failure to meet academic and administrative requirements, her scholarship had been revoked for non-compliance. There was no mention of her hospitalization, no acknowledgement of extraordinary circumstances, no reference to the fire, the rescue, or the injuries. Just policy language. Just finality. She stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, waiting for them to change. They didn't. Her hands trembled as she scrolled, searching for instructions, an appeal link, a contact person, anything. There was nothing. No path forward. No. If you have questions, just a closing line wishing her success in future endeavors, as if her future hadn't just been quietly erased with a single click. Devastation settled in slowly, then all at once. It felt heavier than the pain in her lungs, heavier than the burns. This was different. This was the collapse of something she had spent years building. She thought of every night she stayed awake studying, every time she said no to rest, to fun, to distraction. All of it had been tied to that scholarship. Without it, college wasn't delayed. It was impossible. What hurt most wasn't just the loss. It was the silence around it. No one asked what happened. No one acknowledged that she had missed exams because she was lying in a hospital bed, struggling to breathe. No one cared that the reason she fell behind was because she chose to save a life. The system didn't see bravery. It didn't see context. It didn't see her at all. She felt invisible, disposable, like her role had ended the moment the fire went out. At night, she lay awake replaying the moment she ran toward the car. Doubt crept in, unwanted and cruel. If she had waited, if she had stayed back like everyone else, if she had protected herself first. The thoughts made her sick with guilt, because she knew she would run again if given the same choice. And yet the cost of that choice sat heavy on her chest, unanswered and unresolved. She wasn't asking for praise. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She was asking to be seen, to have her humanity acknowledged in a process that reduced her life to checkboxes and deadlines. Instead, she learned a painful lesson far too early. Systems rarely bend for sacrifice, and rules don't feel remorse. As days passed, the email stayed open on her screen like an accusation. Proof that doing the right thing didn't protect her. Proof that the world could take everything from you and still expect gratitude for the opportunity to comply. And somewhere beneath the anger and fear, a quiet question began to form, one she didn't yet know would change everything for someone else too. Did her sacrifice really mean nothing at all? The days after the email blurred into a slow, exhausting battle against silence. She refused to accept the decision quietly. At first, she believed it had to be a mistake, an oversight that would be corrected once a real person actually read her words. She wrote another email, longer this time, carefully explaining everything again. She attached hospital records. She listed dates. She asked, politely but clearly, for reconsideration. When there was no response, she sent another, then another. Each message grew more urgent, though she tried to keep her tone measured, respectful, hopeful. She didn't want to sound angry. She didn't want to sound desperate. She just wanted to be heard. No one replied. She began calling instead. The scholarship office number became painfully familiar, etched into her memory. She called in the mornings, then afternoons, then right before the office closed. Sometimes the phone rang until voicemail picked up. Sometimes it disconnected without warning. When she did leave messages, she spoke slowly, clearly, repeating her name, her ID number, her situation. "Please," she said more than once, her voice cracking despite her effort to stay composed. "I just need to talk to someone." No one ever called back. Days turned into weeks. The silence wasn't just frustrating, it was humiliating. It made her feel small, like she was shouting into a void that had already decided she didn't matter enough to answer. Friends suggested she keep pushing, that institutions always responded eventually. But each unanswered message chipped away at her belief that effort alone could fix this. Then the financial reality began to settle in. College acceptance letters arrived schools she had dreamed of, places she had imagined herself walking across campus with pride and relief. She opened them with shaking hands, knowing even before she read the words that they were now impossible promises. Tuition numbers stared back at her, impossibly large, mocking her hope. Without the scholarship, there was no way forward. Her family couldn't help. They had celebrated her achievement because it meant they wouldn't have to worry about how to afford it. Now, that same truth made the loss unbearable. She started looking up alternatives late at night loans, part-time programs, deferrals, but every option felt like a shadow version of the future she had worked toward. Even deferring felt like defeat, like admitting that the fire had taken more than just her breath. It had taken her momentum, her confidence, her belief that doing the right thing would somehow protect her in the long run. Emotionally, she unraveled in quiet ways. She smiled when people asked how she was doing. She said she was figuring things out. But alone, regret crept in, unwelcome and poisonous. It whispered questions she hated herself for even thinking. What if I hadn't run? What if I'd waited? What if I'd let someone else help? She replayed the moment again and again, not with pride, but with doubt. Not because she wished the boy harm, but because she couldn't ignore what her choice had cost her. The worst part was the absence. She never heard from the boy's family. No letter. No call. No message passed through the hospital or the school. Nothing to suggest they even knew her name. She wondered if he remembered her at all, or if she had already faded into the background of his life as just a blurry figure from a traumatic day. She told herself she hadn't done it for thanks, and that was true, but the silence still hurt. It made her question whether her sacrifice had meant anything beyond that single moment. Some nights, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her chest harder than smoke ever had. She thought about how easily the system had moved on, how quickly her bravery had been forgotten once it became inconvenient. She felt punished, not officially, not publicly, but quietly, through indifference. She tried one last time. A final email. Shorter. Raw. She wrote that she wasn't asking for special treatment, only fairness. That she had missed deadlines because she had been hospitalized after saving someone's life. That she was willing to meet any requirement, retake exams, provide any documentation needed. She ended it with a simple sentence she debated deleting but left in anyway. Please don't let this be how my story ends. There was no reply. When the reality finally sank in, it felt like grief. Not loud or dramatic, but heavy and constant. She began packing away college materials, folding brochures she no longer had the heart to look at. She avoided conversations about the future. The girl who had once planned every step carefully now struggled to imagine what came next. And in the quiet of that struggle, one painful thought refused to leave her alone. That maybe, in a world rules, and silence, doing the right thing had cost her everything she had worked for. The boy woke up screaming long before the burns healed and the glass cuts faded. At night, the crash replayed itself without warning. The screech of tires, the violent spin, the sudden heat swallowing the air. Sometimes it was the fire that woke him. Other times it was the feeling of being trapped, lungs burning, the certainty that he was about to die. Doctors called it trauma. His father called it shock. But the boy knew it was something deeper than fear. It was memory refusing to loosen its grip. In those moments, one image returned again and again. Her face. Not clearly at first, just flashes. A voice shouting for him to cover his face. Hands pulling at the door. Someone coughing violently as they dragged him away from the flames. When the panic subsided, he would sit up in bed, heart racing, and ask the same question he had asked since the hospital. Did anyone find her? The girl who pulled me out? At first, adults brushed it off gently. They told him to rest. That the important thing was that he was alive. That emergencies were chaotic and people came and went. But he kept asking. During breakfast, during follow-up appointments, during long car rides when silence settled too comfortably, he wanted to know her name. He wanted to know if she was okay, because he knew the truth. He would be dead if she hadn't run toward that car. The boy came from a world where problems were usually solved quietly and efficiently. His father was powerful, not flashy about it, but deeply connected. The kind of man whose phone calls were returned immediately. The kind of man who sat on boards, funded programs, and influenced decisions without ever needing his name printed publicly. His son had grown up protected by that influence, even if he didn't fully understand it. But influence hadn't helped in the fire. A stranger had. As the boy's nightmares continued, his father began to listen more closely. He asked his son to describe her again. The boy spoke about her voice, how she didn't hesitate, how she smelled like smoke too, how she coughed worse than he did when they hit the ground. That detail stuck with his father. It didn't sound like someone trained. It sounded like someone who chose him over themselves. The father began asking questions, at first, casually. He contacted the hospital, asking if they had records of another patient admitted that day with smoke inhalation and burns. Privacy laws limited what they could share, but confirmation was enough. Yes, there had been a young woman. Yes, she had been injured in the rescue. Yes, she had been discharged weeks later. Then the father asked more questions. Quiet ones. He spoke to school administrators, to local officials, to people who knew how to find information without making noise. Slowly, a picture formed. The girl was a student, an exceptional one, first generation, on a full scholarship. That word scholarship caught his attention, because the foundation that funded it was one he knew very well. It wasn't advertised publicly, but he was more than a donor. He was an owner in everything but name. He sat on the highest level of oversight. Policies were approved through committees, but ultimate authority rested with people like him. He didn't micromanage. He trusted systems, until now. He asked for records. What he found made his stomach turn. The scholarship had been revoked weeks earlier. The reason listed was non-compliance. Missed exams, missed documentation, no appeal filed. Case closed. There was no mention of hospitalization, no exception review, no human commentary. Just a clean administrative decision that erased years of work with the press of a button. The father leaned back in his chair, silent. His son was alive because this girl ran into fire. And the system he controlled had punished her for it. He didn't call anyone immediately. He didn't send angry emails or demand explanations. Instead, he did what he did best. He investigated. He read every policy. He traced every email. He followed the timeline with precision. And the deeper he went, the clearer it became. No one had meant to be cruel. They had simply followed rules without context. And in doing so, they had failed in the most basic way possible. They had forgotten why the scholarship existed in the first place. That night, the father sat at his son's bedside as the boy slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. He looked at the steady rise and fall of his chest and felt a quiet, burning resolve settle in. This wasn't about charity. It wasn't about favors. It was about justice. And somewhere across town, a girl who thought she had been forgotten was about to learn that silence does not always mean indifference, and that sometimes the truth only waits until the right person is ready to hear it. The meeting was scheduled without explanation, which was unusual enough to make everyone uneasy. Members of the scholarship board arrived first, folders tucked under their arms, whispering quietly as they took their seats around the long conference table. School administrators followed, principals, advisors, compliance officers, people accustomed to meetings about budgets, rankings, and performance metrics. No one knew exactly why they had been called together on such short notice. They only knew who had called the meeting. And that alone was enough to demand attention. When the father entered the room, conversation stopped instantly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. In fact, his calm was what unsettled them most. He took a seat at the head of the table, placed a thin folder in front of him, and folded his hands. For a moment, he said nothing, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then he spoke. "I want to ask a very simple question," he said evenly. "Why was her scholarship revoked?" The room shifted. A few people exchanged glances, unsure who should answer. Finally, one of the board members cleared their throat and slid a document forward. They explained that the student had failed to meet academic and administrative requirements, missed exams, missed documentation deadlines. According to policy, the scholarship required strict compliance. Exceptions, they said, created precedent. Precedent created risk. Another administrator nodded, adding that multiple reminders had been sent and that no formal appeal had been filed within the designated window. Everything had been handled by the book. There was no malice in their voices, only professionalism. The steady confidence of people who believed rules were the same as fairness. The father listened without interrupting. When they finished, he nodded once. "Thank you," he said. "Now let me give you the context that seems to be missing." He opened the folder in front of him and slid several documents across the table. Hospital admission records, discharge summaries, dates highlighted carefully in yellow. He didn't rush. He let them read. "This student was hospitalized," he continued, "with smoke inhalation and burn injuries. During the exact period she missed those exams. During the exact window you're calling non-compliance." A compliance officer frowned slightly. "We weren't informed of." The father raised his hand gently. "She informed you," he said, "multiple times. With documentation." The room grew quieter. He leaned back in his chair and looked around the table, making eye contact with each person in turn. "Now here's the part none of you included in your reports," he said. "The reason she was in that hospital." He paused. "She pulled my son from a burning car." No one spoke. "She ran toward fire," he went on calmly, while others stood back. "She forced open a door that wouldn't budge. She inhaled smoke so my son could breathe. And seconds after she dragged him out, that car exploded." The words settled heavily over the room. "My son would be dead," the father said quietly, "if she had followed your policies instead of her instincts." Silence swallowed the table whole. A board member shifted uncomfortably. Another lowered their eyes. Someone's pen rolled off the table and clattered to the floor, the sound sharp in the stillness. No one moved to pick it up. The father didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't threaten. He simply continued. "This scholarship exists," he said, "to support students of character, resilience, and promise. That's the language in your mission statement." "I know. I helped write it." He let that sink in. And yet, when presented with a student who demonstrated extraordinary character at extraordinary personal cost, this system responded with indifference. An administrator tried to speak. "We never intended." "I know," the father interrupted gently. "That's the problem." He stood then, slowly, deliberately. "No one intended to punish her. But intention doesn't erase impact. And impact is what matters." He looked down at the documents one last time. "You followed policy," he said, "but you abandoned purpose." The room remained silent, thick with realization. "Effective immediately," he said. "Her scholarship will be reinstated in full, with academic flexibility to account for her recovery, and additional support to ensure she doesn't pay twice for saving a life." No one argued. No one could. Because in that moment, every person in the room understood the same truth. This wasn't a favor being granted. It was a wrong being corrected. And the cost of ignoring it had already been far too high. The reversal happened faster than anything else had since the fire. Where silence had dragged on for weeks, action now moved with startling speed. Less than 24 hours after the meeting ended, an email arrived in her inbox, but this one felt different from the moment she opened it. It wasn't cold. It wasn't distant. It wasn't written in the language of policy and compliance. It addressed her by name. The scholarship had been reinstated in full. Not provisionally, not conditionally. Fully restored, with written confirmation that missed exams and deadlines would not count against her record. Academic flexibility would be provided. Recovery accommodations approved. On top of that, additional financial support was included: stipends for books, housing assistance, and access to academic advisors whose sole job would be to make sure she never fell behind again because of circumstances beyond her control. She read the email 3 times, afraid to trust it. Her hands shook as she scrolled, heart pounding not with fear this time, but disbelief. There was an apology, direct and unambiguous. The committee acknowledged their failure to consider context. She sat at the kitchen table and cried not the quiet, defeated tears she had shed alone at night, but deep, uncontrollable sobs that came from a place of release. The weight she had been carrying finally cracked. But the moment didn't end there. Days later, the school held a public assembly. She hadn't been told exactly why she was invited, only that her presence mattered. She almost didn't go. Standing in front of people still felt daunting after everything she had been through. But something told her she needed to show up, even if her voice shook. The auditorium filled with students, faculty, and administrators. When her name was called, a hush fell over the room. A short video played footage from traffic cameras, news clips of the fire, eyewitness accounts. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the story unfolded, not dramatized, not exaggerated, just told plainly. Then came the applause. It started slowly, hesitant at first, then rose into something overwhelming. People stood. Teachers wiped their eyes. Students clapped until their hands hurt. For the first time since the fire, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't a line item. She wasn't a problem to be managed. She was seen. After the assembly, someone approached her quietly. A man she recognized from the meeting photos online, the boy's father. He didn't speak like a powerful figure. He spoke like a parent. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving my son a future." Then the boy stepped forward. He looked different than she remembered, healthier, steadier, but his eyes held the same intensity. He didn't hesitate. He hugged her tightly, awkwardly, like someone afraid words wouldn't be enough. "I think about that day all the time," he said, voice unsteady. "I wouldn't be here without you." She didn't know what to say. She never had. So she smiled, nodded, and let the moment exist without trying to define it. Later that night, alone in her room, she opened the scholarship portal again, not with fear, but with certainty. Her future was back where it belonged, not handed to her, not gifted out of pity, returned because it had never truly been lost, only overlooked. And in that quiet moment, she finally understood something that had taken her weeks of pain to learn. Her sacrifice had never been invisible. It had simply been waiting for the right moment and the right conscience to be recognized. She had run into fire to save a life. And in doing so, she had proven something far greater than academic compliance. She had proven her worth. It changed because the truth finally stood in front of it, undeniable. And for the first time since the flames died out, she slept without fear, knowing that doing the right thing had not destroyed her future after all. It had revealed it. In the quiet after everything settled, after the applause faded and the emails stopped arriving, the truth of what had happened began to sink in, not just for her, but for everyone who heard her story. It wasn't really about a scholarship or a fire or even a dramatic rescue. It was about the way systems are built and who they're built for. Systems love rules because rules are easy to measure. Deadlines, compliance, checklists. They give the illusion of fairness. But what this story exposed was something far more uncomfortable. When rules are followed without humanity, they don't protect people, they punish them. Especially the ones who step outside their own safety to help someone else. She learned that lesson the hard way. Compassion, she discovered, doesn't always come with immediate reward. In fact, it often comes with consequences. Time lost, opportunities delayed, pain that no policy accounts for. When she ran toward that burning car, the system didn't pause to ask why she missed exams or paperwork. And that indifference almost cost her everything. But what the system failed to do, she did for herself. She endured. The girl who emerged from that experience was not the same one who had walked home from school that afternoon. She was stronger, not because she wanted to be, but because she had been forced to carry disappointment, fear, and doubt without letting them crush her. She was more confident, not in institutions or guarantees, but in her own values. She learned that her worth wasn't defined by approval letters or committee decisions, even when those things mattered deeply. She stopped apologizing for what she needed. She stopped shrinking when asking for fairness. And she stopped questioning whether her instincts were something to suppress. The fire didn't just test her courage, it clarified it. Her story also left a mark on those who watched it unfold. On administrators who realized too late that policy is meaningless without compassion. On leaders who understood that power comes with responsibility, not distance. On students who saw that bravery doesn't always look heroic in the moment. It often looks lonely afterward. And on a boy who learned that his life was saved not by wealth, influence, or preparation, but by a stranger who refused to look away. In the end, justice wasn't restored because the system suddenly became kind. It was restored because someone inside it chose to listen. Because truth, once exposed, demanded correction. That's the part we don't talk about enough. That systems don't change on their own. People change them. People who are willing to admit when rules have gone too far, when efficiency has erased empathy, when doing things by the book has quietly done harm. It may isolate you. It may take something from you that you worked years to earn. But it also reveals something priceless. Who you are when it's hardest, and who truly matters when the moment comes. She didn't run into the fire expecting recognition. She didn't help because she thought it would protect her future. She helped because someone needed help. And in a world increasingly governed by rules, metrics, and convenience, that choice still matters, perhaps now more than ever. So the story doesn't really end with a reinstated scholarship or a public apology. It ends with a question that lingers long after the screen goes dark. A question meant not just for her, but for all of us. And knew the cost could be high. Would you still choose to help, knowing the price you might have to pay?